Donna Doucette. I am curious on his take on watering methods. Of course, soil conditions equally important. Water can be a real issue, lack of. I hear watering thoroughly once weekly is better than a little each day. Okay, this is a great question for you.
Well, watering thoroughly once weekly is a great idea if you're watering with a sprinkler or by hand. And it takes a long time to water thoroughly because you have to put down the equivalent of enough water to wet the soil about 6 inches deep, which takes on average maybe an inch depth. If you had a can and there's a sprinkler on, the can would fill with an inch of water. But to me, the ideal way to water, which is both good for the plant and saves water, is with drip irrigation. Drip irrigation typically saves 60% of water over sprinkler irrigation.
Are your hoses under the ground or are they just laying on the ground?
When I first did it many years ago, I did it underground, and then it was sort of like when I put a trowel in the ground. Everyone saw it was like I struck oil, you know, of the water. So now I do it on top of the ground, not only for that reason, but also because one thing about drip irrigation, it's a very easy to set up and it works great and everything, but you do have to check it every once in a while, make sure. I like to see the
It's
line,
functioning.
yeah, just to make sure because things happen, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But
That
yeah, I'm
makes
a
sense.
big fan of drip irrigation. And it's I know sometimes when we've had a droughty summer, and people in town, they know that I'm a big gardener, and they ask me how my garden is, and they probably think I'm going to start moaning and groaning how bad it is. It's like great because I got all the water just through drip irrigation
Perfect.
and bright sunlight and heat, and yeah.
That's true. I mean, I guess the very conditions that cause a drought are ideal for growing if you've got enough water.
Yeah,
Um,
and if water is limiting, drip irrigation makes, as I said, much more efficient use of it.
that makes yes, yeah. If you were somewhere where it cost money or there's, um, you know, sort of conservation, or if your well is at risk. Are you on a well or are you on
Yeah, I'm on a
just a?
well, and when I first moved here, I had a sprinkler on once, and it was a droughty summer, and I have a shallow well. It's only 11 feet deep.
Wow.
It's what's called a dug well. It's 4 foot concrete rings, you know, but I live on a road called Springtown Road. So there's a lot of springs there, so it recharges quite quickly. But when I had a sprinkler on, I accidentally drew it down too fast and it dried out. But in an hour it'll recharge. But now I have much more on drip irrigation and it never dries out.
Right, because
And
you're
the other
not
thing is,
losing it through evaporation to the same extent.
well, also the thing is with a sprinkler irrigation, or this once a week irrigation, which is recommended, when you first put the water down, you're actually flooding the soil with water, which means all the pores are filled up. And roots do need oxygen to function. So the roots don't take up a lot of that water. And then gravity drains all the weakly held
Ah,
out of the soil, and then the plant's happy because then there's air in the soil. And then eventually, the plants can't get any more water out of the soil, so they're suffering from drought a little. And then you water it again, presumably because it's the weak. But the plant is going through this feast and famine cycle, and
ah.
you're wasting all that water. Not to mention, you're also with a sprinkler, it's very democratic. It spreads water everywhere, like not necessarily only where you want plants to be. So
Yeah.
drip irrigation is more pinpointing. As
That's
you can tell, I'm a big fan of drip irrigation.
that's my challenge in my garden. I mean, I've got walking paths and beds, and sprinkler doesn't make any sense because
Right.
I'd be watering my walking paths for the most part, and I'd
And
have to move it all the time.
you'll be growing, helping weeds grow in the
I'd be
paths.
helping, right? And my garden, the walking paths, I put sand down. I just had this idea of turning the walking paths into a desert and the beds into an oasis. And one of the side, I mean, the reason I started doing it was because I got worried about ticks because we have ticks here, and
Uh-huh.
I had young kids and stuff like that. And I had a tick expert on the show, and I was asking her about sand, and she said ticks hate sand, right?
Oh,
Because they don't like dry environments, right? And the sand dries out very fast. Even after the most incredible rain, it's dry in an hour. It just
well,
water goes right.
how deep is the sand?
Oh, like 5 inches. You know,
Oh, wow.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, originally the walking paths were mulched beds. And so if anything actually starts growing, it grows really well because there's like beautiful black earth underneath all that sand, right? Um, but and actually this year I have to replenish it because I grew it over this springy, beautiful soil, so it still keeps. I almost should have put like crusher dust down then sand.
Yeah.
Um, but the good thing about having sand is that if any over that soft stuff is that if anything does start growing it, I can pull it out no problem because it's so soft underneath.
Right.
But one of the side benefits of the sand is that it's a heat sink,
Huh.
right? So like I can go outside and there may snow on the ground and my walking paths are completely thawed, right?
Hmm.
The water doesn't accumulate on them. The water goes down through, and because I mean, they're not black, but they're darker than snow, right?
Right.
And in the spring, in the earlier season, you can feel like when you walk from my lawn to the garden, you can feel this heat because you think about it, it's like a big rock that's soft.
Well,
Right?
it's also because it's not holding water, and water, has this heat capacity. So if you have a moist soil, won't change temperature as quickly as a dry soil.
Uh, yeah,
So
yeah.
that, this as the temperature warms in the spring, the wet soil is still retaining some of winter's cold, whereas the sand can change more quickly.
Well, and I view the pathways as being almost like they were concrete. I mean, it is rocks, right? Sand
Yeah.
is rocks.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
so it's basically I have a garden surrounded with rocks,
Yeah.
and rocks hold heat, even if it's sand, right? So you can be out there, and it's like, and so it just creates this weird little microclimate back there, and it's helped a lot. I mean, it doesn't solve my not enough sunlight problem, but on a day when it is sunny, everything gets warmed up, and it's really sort of solved some of my early spring issues with the garden, just getting things happening a lot better. And there's no amount of heat that's enough heat here, so we'll just can't
Right.
get overheated here. It's just not warm enough for that. So it wouldn't work for certain parts of the world. It would just might get like crazy hot. But for here, it seems to. So it's one of the side benefits. I did it mainly to have a sort of slightly weed proof, mostly tick
Right.
proof sort of situation. It looks cool too. It looks kind of neat.
Yeah.
Um,
The main problem seems it's heavy stuff.
Now, so you hire a young guy to do it.
Oh yeah.
So like
Right.
a dump truck dumps it off, and then I put an ad on and then get some guy who's like 18 and big
Right.
muscles like a wrestler. And yeah, I'm
And
amazed at
and then you say, "I bet you can't move all that sand."
I pay him, but it's humbling to watch a teenager outperform you. Uh,
Right. They
you know,
get used to it.
well, and he's like, "What are you doing tonight?" "Oh, I'm gonna go play hockey." I'd be like wrecked. If I did a third of what that guy's doing, I'd be wrecked for a week. You know, so but that's my solution. Until my kids are old enough to move that kind of weight.